So this one is week 4, observation and ethnography. So what do we mean by observation? Observations are a qualitative method that we collect data on how people behave. So it's no longer the action of asking people about their behaviors or experiences. You're actually observing their behavior happening in real life. It takes place in a community setting. Most of it is happening where they are, that is relevant to the topic. If you're studying concussions, you will be in a baseball field, football field, sports, and so on. If I study young cares, I would be somewhere near schools or houses or things like that. If someone studies children's behavior in a playground, they will be in a playground. If they studying parenting, they will be in, I don't know, where do you see a lot of parents, like farmers market or community events and all that stuff. So it relates to their participants' environment, and it's very cool because it's not that the participants come to you, you go to where the participants are. And the goal is to learn about a phenomena more holistically. Usually it is going to be tested with other methods, so you can do interviews and enhance it with observation and vice versa, but the goal is to really understand what is happening in this phenomena, in this experience, and the behaviors will tell us a lot, because when you do an interview or a focus group with a person, they're allowed to share what they want, they're allowed to quit anytime they want to, but in observation, you are just watching a natural behavior occurring. So whatever they told you about how they would behave, this is very different where they actually are going to behave. So you get to understand that missing piece more holistically. The duration of observation varies greatly. Some studies have very small observations, some studies have very large observations, some studies go they can observe for 1 year, and some studies observe only 3 times. So it really varies drastically, and it just pertains to the fact that your study and research is all different, and also pertains to something that's called saturation. Saturation is when you can stop a study and no longer collect data when you feel like there's no new knowledge coming in. It also has to do with interviews and focus groups. How many are enough? It's when you think that getting more people will not produce any new meaningful data, so you need to stop. And that is very much happens in observations too. When you're going to see no variations in behaviors anymore, you can stop the study. Observations come with types. You can have controlled structured observation, naturalistic observation, participant observation, and non-participant observations. And for controlled structured ones, they're very much controlled. They are the ones that manipulated by you, very much quantitative usually, very much observational, and they seek to understand with all objective measures how you would act in a lab-like laboratory setting, and usually quantifying behavior. So how many times you would steal a marshmallow, for example. Remember those psychology experiments with the kid would have marshmallows and the parents would leave and they say, don't eat the marshmallow, kid, and the kid would say okay, and that was something to test their immediate gratification. Like if they don't, can they delay gratification? Basically, if they don't steal the marshmallow and eat it right away, then they can delay gratification. And so that was done in laboratory lab-like settings. They are very manipulated by you. You put the marshmallows down, you leave, they do something. You then, as an experiment, you get to observe their behavior under these conditions. Naturalistic is the total opposite. It's a form of observation that happens where you are in a natural environment, in a park, let's say, without you intruding on the space. You're not manipulating anything, you're not setting anything up, you're just there to naturally observe what is happening. The clinical setting can be natural, so the lab-like setting, if it's an actual part of their usual routine. So if a kid is going to language assessment courses and you're just observing their behavior. It is just pertaining to the research study and it's their usual routine to go there. So you would just naturally be there. Using a naturalistic observation can give a real world edge to your study. So it's almost like, because you're not intruding, it's what would happen in a real world. It's very much reflective of what you would see if you weren't even there, and can be useful to children with mental health difficulties to know in a natural space what is happening without any sort of adult manipulation, any manipulation of environment, and so on. Participant observation, again, very much different, is that this observation takes place when you become a participant in a setting. So you are now not only intruding, you're becoming a part of the setting. You're becoming a part of the context that you are studying and communicating with children you are observing. So not so much intruding, we like to use the word immersive experience. You immerse yourself in the field with the participant. You take on a participatory role when you start exploring people in the setting. You're talking to them, you're engaging with them, you're playing with them, you're doing all the things that they're doing with them, and you're just becoming with them, immersed in the experience. The non-participant observation is, again, very much different. Is that where you just simply observe from the sidelines. You're observing on a park. This is kind of like the study that you've read about coming into this week, where you're just there on a sideline. So if somebody is observing children in a park, you're just there observing without telling the children that they're being watched. They don't know. And this does, of course, carry ethical concerns, because, of course, what do you do with in consent? What do you do? How do you protect them and yourself? And you have to know how to justify the choices that you're going to have a non-participant observation. You have to let people know, but there are rules with it. So we will kind of establish what they are and so on, what you're allowed or not allowed to do, what you should or should not do. But it's very much one of those observations that they don't know that you are watching them. Observation types can be combined, so you can have a participant naturalistic observation, or you can have a non-participant control observation, or you can have another mixed kind of combined observation types. It doesn't have to always be just these four. They can be combined and different. The difference really is that how overt or covert observation is. Do the participants know that they're being observed? Or is it covert that they don't know that they're being observed? And it's very different, right? Covert observation, it's almost like that undercover, versus overt, you are there, they know you're there, so you're not making yourself hidden, or you're not making yourself not known that you're there. Covert is like undercover, they don't know that you're there, and they don't know that they're being observed. Usually enhances with other methods, like I said in the beginning. Usually you would want to do interviews with it, focus groups with it. You can have conversations with it, and so on. So observation is not the only method, although sometimes it is, but usually is enhanced with other methods. Sometimes the methods are quantitative and it's an experiment and you still do an observation. So things like that can mix. And you must keep a notebook to record as much detail as possible about what they observed. So the notebook is way more detailed than what you would detail an interview or focus group. Here you have to pay attention to everything, because it is built on the fact that you're going to memorize this. If you observing somebody, you're not recording them, you're not speaking to them, so you don't have verbatim information. You have to make sure you have a lot of detail to recreate these scenes when you are going to talk about it and submit it for publications, for example. So you have to have a record that is very good. The field notes are going to be detailed. They're going to be broken down to images, what you see, actions, what you see, words, what you hear, sounds, what you hear in the background, touch, smells, spatial organization, how the setting is organized, emotions, theirs and yours, and positionality, theirs and yours. So as an observer, where are you standing, how are you being reflexive, and so on. So what is your identity, gender, sexuality, all that stuff, how they position you within the study. How do you see these participants, any biases that you need to explicitly state, and so on. So here is one table, for example, that has more detail about them. So appearance is something that you want to observe that has to do with clothing, age, gender, physical appearance. So researchers should note anything that might indicate membership in groups or subpopulations of interest to the study: profession, social status, socioeconomic class, religion, ethnicity. Anything with clothing, age, gender, physical appearance has to be noted. Verbal behavior and interactions: who speaks to whom, how long, who initiates these conversations, the languages, the dialect spoken, tone of voice is very important. So here the researcher should note gender, age, ethnicity, profession of the speakers, dynamic of the interaction, is it formal, informal, things like that. Physical behavior and gestures: what people do, who does what, who interacts with whom, who is not interacting, anybody touching, anybody hugging, kissing, things like that. You have to observe how people use their bodies and voices to communicate different emotions, what individuals' behaviors indicate about their feelings towards one another, their social rank, profession. So pay attention to those as you read the articles about ethnography, and see if you can spot a bit of that when these researchers take these notes, right? One day you didn't see the notes that they took, but you saw the summary of their records of interactions between the boys climbing trees or the teacher and the boy going down the snow. You need to pay attention to what the researcher was like on the sidelines, and really what kind of detail they had to put on a paper to represent that record later on in a written form. Because to me it was moving, they had to pay attention to the gender and age of the teacher, their social rank, how some kids were talking, what they said to whom, how they acted, the joy, they even described in words different levels of excitement and fear, like shrieking, and using adjectives like that was really it's very important. You have to pay attention to all the details in like the gestures and the vocal language that they've used. The tone of voice has to be there too. The personal space: how close people stand to one another, what individuals' preference concerning personal space suggests about their relationships. Are they close? Are they hugging? Do they know each other? Are they family members? Did they just meet? Do they know each other? Things like that. You'll notice in a park, if you observe parents in a park, let's say, you would not necessarily know who came there together, as in parents who are friends with children, or who just simply standing close to each other and they just sharing this experience of having children on a playground, and then they're talking and laughing, and that is the experience for today. So the personal space is very important too, as well as human traffic: people who enter, leave, spend time at the observation site, like where people enter and exit, how long they stay, who they are, ethnicity, age, gender. Do you see all women in a park with children? Are men in a park with children? Are men watching on a sideline with no children? How does that make you feel? Like, it all is related to the culture and society that we live in. And people who stand out: so identification of people who receive a lot of attention from others. So for example, for us in the park, let's say if I was observing parents and their kids in kindergarten, I would be paying attention to teenagers in a park, let's say, and these are going to receive a lot of attention from parents in the park. So you would note things like that in the field notes. They have to be detailed as possible. Now, something that does happen in observations is called observation effect. Changes in behavior once the participants know that they're being observed. It's not a new kind of idea. It has been there since psychology and all the experiments that were undergone with children and youth, when they did experimentation on children and youth instead of with. And this can happen today too, because even though you're trying to do a research study observing children and youth and letting them know that you're there and you're partaking as in a participant observation, you can just your mere presence will change their behaviors. Once they know they're being watched, it might change how they act. That's why a lot of even reality shows, if you do watch them, you have to pay attention, like, would they act the same if they're not being watched? Like, how does that happen? You have to critically assess that, because people change their behaviors when they know others are watching. So that is called observer effect. And how much of it influences your research, that is much of a drawback of an observation. Ethnography is really a study that takes observation, but it's a qualitative method that, using the same observation, it's almost like a participant observation. It uses it to examine and understand a phenomena by providing a very detailed account of an in-depth immersion into the field. So participant observation is one of the observations you would use during ethnography, and it's a study where you go into the field and you immerse yourself in, you blend in, you interact with the people, you become almost like a friend, you become one of them, you're not an outsider anymore, you're an insider now, you become closely in a close relationship with them. So these are when a lot of anthropologists used to do ethnographies, and they would go to tribes and see what it's like to be living there, eating there, blending with them, figure whatever that research topic was, is that it's, in a way, you're taking notes by being with them and observing them in their natural environment, and you create a very detailed account of that experience to understand a certain phenomenon. And it exists also on a continuum. So you can be a passive observer, which means that you're most likely on the sidelines without actually interacting or blending yourself in, to a very active participant observer. You are much on the other spectrum of it. You're blending in, interacting, and getting very close to the participants and who they are, and you playing with them and all that stuff. So still on a continuum, but most of it is towards the active participation observation. Children's role in ethnographies can be very different. So the articles that I gave you, Levy 2009, explains how there are different roles that children can take in ethnographies. Sometimes it's just by default, you have parents who are ethnographers and you travel with them and you become a helper basically in these studies. But a lot of it, she noted 4 or 5, I guess, types that are very prominent of the children's role in ethnographies. The first one is being a wedge. A wedge is basically helping the adults gain access to sites. It's the mere presence of children makes you gain more access to sites, relationships, you get more trust, you build stronger relationships, you diminish tensions. She gave examples of a lot of studies that just the mere sense of children, they found that, for example, you are less likely to be a cop, and that's why all the diminished tensions went away and they were trusted more. So they got you the information you were looking for, with the child being there as a wedge. And knowledge, accessing information easier. So once the children broke through, and their presence is likely to initiate that more trust, then you get more knowledge with that trust. Another way that children's role can be there is through a collaborative role. Children who can help create the research questions. Collaborative roles are really cool. You give the children the voice and the mechanisms and the tools to do the research with you alongside. You can help with data collection, you can help with report writing, you can co-author on publications, you can present your findings on a conference, you can assist in taking notes. These are collaborators, like true helpers, like research assistants of the study. An informant could be children that help develop more trust and insider information, basically. A subject of study, they can be the subject or the object of study. Subject of the study, we all know, it's when children are truly giving a voice and their experiences are that of an expert alongside with adults who are on the same level as them. Children are seen as individuals fully able to answer questions in a worthwhile way. Usually it's done with children and youth are being part of the study in some capacity, and their voices are being respected. Object of the study is when the topic is on children and youth, but their views are not being observed, they are not being conversed about. It's basically looking indirectly about children and youth using people like parents or teachers and really not giving children's voice any sort of respect. Much less done now, but the author gave examples of some studies that did do that. The strength of ethnography is that there is an immersion into young people's worlds. You become one with them. You are there, they see you for a prolonged period of time. You are participating with them. You can be a part of their daily routines. You build a rapport with them and you really truly immerse into their world. The only way to know how they experience is that if they give you access to that world and you just see a little bit with their help of explaining what they feel and experience, you gain a little insight into that. It's a thorough and deep engagement, so meaning that you really truly go the extra mile. You make sure that you become close to them and the bond is there, relationship building, you becoming trustworthy member, the insider group. So I put that here. It says, I can't tell if this is ethnography or hanging out. You really are hanging out, but you of course doing a research too, but you're hanging out. You're actually learning a lot from them, and it's shaping your understanding of this in-depth phenomena. Now, of course, there's strength, like it allows insight into context, relationships, and behaviors. It can provide information previously unknown to researchers that is crucial for a project design, data collection, interpretation of other data. But the weakness is that it's very time consuming. The more successful ethnographers, of course, going to do more time spent with the people who are they observing, and it's very time consuming. It's a long process to build this relationship, to observe them in such capacity that you're not just on the sidelines, but you really immerse yourself in. Documentation relies on memory, personal discipline, and diligence of the researcher, which means that it relies on memory. So you have to make sure that you draw these notes right away. If you do that during the time you're observing, you might come across as not trustworthy. Like, why are you taking notes about me? What are you writing about? So the participant might be less happy, I guess, and less understanding of why are you doing that. So a lot of ethnographers find good ways of doing note taking after, but they rely on their memory. So you have to be very diligent in when you put these notes and how much detail you can remember. And it's a personal discipline. You have to not forget, right? Because with more past days, you're going to forget how this experience was like, and the observation will become clouded by the fact that you don't remember. So it's very important to be doing notes and documenting these experiences very much, but not in a way that it interferes with relationship building and increasing suspect in participants. And requires a conscious effort at objectivity. Even though it's very much subjective, you're still trying to make all the right all the right steps to make it as objective as possible, but you can't because it's very objective. So it's almost like a tension. You're trying to make these notes, you're trying to make this context to be very explicit, but the best way to do it, I think, for this ethnography and observation in large is through reflexivity and positionality. It's the only two ways that will really make the study so much more successful. If you take time to really show some reflexivity and to note your biases and maybe your ontological perspective and how it shapes the research and the participants and how you view them. So it's very important to do that here at the early stages of the research. Now, the challenges, of course, is that adults and child are here as gatekeepers. So not only you have to go through the gatekeepers that are often there, like schools and parents, children are also gatekeepers. Did they give you access to come to their world and observe them? Are they happy that you're there? Are they going to trust you? What are you going to do to get them to trust you? So getting access from them, they're just another gatekeeper. So it's very challenging to find children that don't want your presence there and they don't want to be observed. So very hard to navigate. It is always a challenge. Adult outsider status, you can't hide the fact that a researcher would be an adult and you have an outsider status. You're not like them. There is always going to be a hierarchy and they're always going to be a them versus like you versus them or other in-group, out-group situation. So it's very important and challenging to blend that and really show that as much as you're the researcher and you have that adult-child hierarchy, this is the ways you're going to mitigate that. And you have to be explicit and maybe even a little forthcoming to them and say, like, this is who I am, this is what I'm here for, and this is how I'm going to do this study. You don't have to be observed if you don't want to. You don't have to share with me if you don't want to. You don't have to play if you don't want to, but this is what I'm going to do. And sometimes it's very challenging because that's not the way ethnography works, and it's not the way that you might not want to let them know who you are without misleading them, but just not really intruding on the environment. So remember, based on like the early observation types, so it's very hard to know what to do here. It's challenging. You're always going to be that outsider. How you're going to mitigate that hierarchy is up to you. And key informants, very challenging to find the people who can help you facilitate access to certain places and who can get you more gatekeepers, who can get you more information, who can get you access to many, many more people. Very hard to find them. Once you find them, you have to build relationships with them and they have to like you to let you in. So it's almost like they are also really big gatekeeper. But key informants are huge. So for example, if you're doing ethnography with the youth that experience homelessness, for example, your key informant could be a staff at a shelter who knows all these people. That is a key informant. And if that staff member who works in the shelter doesn't really click with you and doesn't really want you near their youth, then you've just lost on a key informant. So you have to build a good relationship with them through emails, through meeting them, through explaining the importance of the study. And once you get them, they will introduce you to others. He or she are the one who is going to introduce you to the youth experience homelessness in Toronto, Ontario, and then you will go to meet with them, observe them, and so on. And also, a key informant might be a youth who experience homelessness, and when other youth will see you with them, they will want to be around you too, because you now become more trustworthy looking. So it's very important where key informants and how they play in shaping or facilitating access to others. some consideration that you will have to give is how much and when to disclose. So how much are you going to disclose about who you are and what the goals of the study is, and when are you going to disclose that? So for example, in true ethnographies where the participants just going to do observations and they're going to talk to you, like for example in bars about politics and so on, they might not have to disclose who they are and what they're doing to study. It might just be that you feel like you've just chatted up somebody about a really good topic and you've had a really good night. But when you need to disclose is that if someone wants to call you later, for example, then you have to say, okay, like this is who I am and this is what the study is going to be about and how I'm going to use the information. Or, you know, how much you're going to disclose. What if it's going to limit the information you get? So there's always this ethics in the back of the mind, because you should never purposely deceive somebody about who you are, and you should never really hide why you're there. So at some point, if you need to disclose, you should, but there's always that ethics behind it, like when and how much you disclose, in what circumstances, and so on. When and how to exit the field. Again, when you're exiting the field after you build such important relationships and bonds with people, it's very hard to exit the field. There is certain effects on a researcher, especially it was assumed it was between the lines in the second article that I gave you. And it was examples of researchers that really took it hard leaving the field because they left people behind that they cared for, that they knew are not doing great. And so what does that does to you? There are certain effects emotionally on you from building these emotional bonds, and have to end it. Considering children and youth always have, I shouldn't say always, they have adults in their lives that are in and out all the time. You know, children, they go to different school years with different teachers. Their peers change often. There's not a lot of consistency aside of parents and where you live, and that sometimes is also variable. They might not take it that hard, but the effects on the researchers are still there. Another important note is when you exit the field. So when saturation happens, and saturation, remember, it's in the event that no new knowledge is going to get produced by another observation. So you get to kind of finish data collection. And so when that saturation happens, you can exit the field, but it's not as easy in ethnographies. And also, how do you use the findings? So a lot of the stuff that people will tell you without knowing that you are doing a study about this phenomena is going to be assumed that it's going to stay private. And how do you maintain that privacy? And you become more integrated with them, and you create these bonds with them, and they might perceive you as a friend. And so for them, it might be a betrayal if you want to use their information and potentially betray their confidentiality, or betray their trust, or betray their privacy. So it's very important to consider too how the information you're going to be used, how it's going to make participants feel. Are they going to be happy about it, or are they going to be angry about it? That's very important too. And another ethical consideration we have to talk about is informed consent and confidentiality. So confidentiality, we already said, is about the protection of identities of participants. How are you going to de-identify the information once you want to use certain information? How are you going to hide who they are? In the article about the ethnography about play, I'm not sure that the people's names, unless I missed it and it said so in the method section, are real. So Max might not be Max. Their ages might be real, but you have to protect the identities of the participants. And it's hard to do when it says that in Norway, these two preschoolers are the main ones, basically, and they're in a forest. How many forest nurseries do you know? So it already of course, they didn't put the name of the nursery, but it might identify the participants in the nursery. So that's something to consider. How much of it do you want to reveal in a published text, and in a way that you still might protect the identities of the participants and maintain confidentiality. Informed consent is very different. You're not really required to ask for informed consent when you observed from a sidelines. Of course, in the school ethnography, in a nursery school, they obtained informed consent with parents, and also the teachers were the gatekeepers. They wouldn't be able to enter these preschools if the teachers didn't say yes to them coming in and being a part of the study. The children were also gatekeepers because they gave them a consent that says, this is what we're here. You don't have to be a part of it if you don't want to. But I think, if I didn't miss it, there was something about informed consent there. But usually in ethnographies, you don't require to have informed consent in observations. If you disclose who you are, you can't be secretive or misleading, but if you disclose who you are, you must remind participants that it's okay not to talk to them, and it's okay that it's very much voluntary, which means that they're not forced to. So these are the two ethical considerations you have to abide by. And then for the, let's tie it to the readings, I felt like this week's readings really pertain to these topics, because, and even the last one about interviews too, of homelessness, I could just see a study where these youth would be observed instead of interviewed with, or enhanced with interviews, but observations first. And so just with these articles, and just in general too, with regards to the risky play one, what kind of observation method was used? So let's see if you know how to get at what kind of observation method was used based on the 4 methods I've described previously. How was childhood conceptualized versus the Western culture? There was something that they said about how they see childhood and risky play versus how we see it in a Western culture. That is very important to this study. Was there a potential for observer effect? Do you think that children potentially changed the way they acted when the researcher was there? And who were the researchers' key informants or gatekeepers? And I said that in a previous lecture slide, so that's funny, but who do you think they were? And for the second study, I want to know, how did children impact the process of ethnography? So meaning the children's role in ethnography there. I've labeled what the role might be, 5 of them, right? But how do you think children impacted the process of ethnography as a whole? So would her reflexivity about how the presence of a child can really navigate what this exchange will be like, how do you think children impacted that experience of conducting ethnography? And how can ethnographies be empowering for children and researchers? In what ways using ethnography is going to empower children, and in what ways will ethnography empower researchers? And of course, your glossary.